This is R2D Tech and we're back again with another video today, this time about the Surface Go 2, so stay tuned. So Microsoft just updated a lot of their Surface line and we got a nice update to the Surface Go, which was a really popular device on the last generation. We got some updates to the design as well as the specs, so let's get into it. So let's talk about the design first, and the most noticeable update is that screen. They've increased the screen size from a 10-inch screen to a 10.5-inch screen. That's now a similar screen size to the smaller iPad Pro. With that enlarged screen size, you're getting slimmer bezels, and that's really nice to see because on the last generation, one of my main complaints was that it just had absolutely massive bezels, which looked quite outdated even back then. What's nice with all Surface devices is that they also have a 3:2 aspect ratio on the display, which I think should be on many more laptops. It means for productivity, you can fit a lot more on the screen vertically, which I think is really nice. You are also getting a resolution of 1920 by 1280, and that should be sharp enough for a screen of that size. I don't think you have any problems. Microsoft have kept the actual size of the device exactly the same. It's 24.5 centimeters by 17.5 centimeters, and for a laptop slash tablet, that's pretty tiny, to be honest. What's nice also is that you can still use all the same accessories from the last generation on this generation, which is also really nice to see. We'll talk about that later. Everything else has been kept pretty much the same. You're getting the same magnesium alloy shell and the same color. Unfortunately, Microsoft didn't give us another color option like they did on the Surface Pro 7. Hopefully next year we will see another color option from Microsoft. Moving on to the battery now. So you can imagine that you're not going to be getting a huge battery in this tiny device, and Microsoft have given a 26.8 watt-hour battery, which sounds pretty small compared to many other devices that now have even 100 watt-hour batteries, like in the new MacBook Pro 16-inch. However, for such a tiny device with such a small screen, it shouldn't be much of an issue. Microsoft have claimed that on average you're going to get 10 hours of battery life, and Surface devices have always had a good track record with battery life, so it shouldn't be much of a problem. Now let's move on to the specs. So talking about the processor options, you can either go for an Intel Pentium Gold processor or an Intel Core M3 processor. Now both of these are dual core processors and they're not going to be incredibly powerful, so you're not going to be able to do incredibly demanding tasks. However, that's not really what this laptop slash tablet is about. For RAM, you can either choose 4 or 8 gigs of RAM, and I would strongly recommend going for the 8GB model. It would just make the experience so much nicer with 8 gigs. I really don't think 4 gigs of RAM is enough to run Windows really smoothly. For storage, you can either go for 64 gigs or 128 gigs. Now, the 64GB model is eMMC storage, which basically means it will have a much slower read and write speed than the 128GB SSD model. So again, if you want a much more snappy experience, go for the 128 gig model. And also I would recommend going for 128 gigs because 64 gigs on a laptop does also sound quite small. So now let's talk about the ports on this device. So you are getting a USB-C port, which isn't Thunderbolt 3, a Surface connector, a headphone jack, and a micro SD card reader. As I mentioned in the Surface Book 3 video, the Surface connector is kind of Microsoft's answer for not giving Thunderbolt 3. If you want, you can buy the Surface dock, which is quite expensive to be honest, and it will give you a whole array of extra ports and it will connect through that Surface connector. I really think Microsoft should just give us Thunderbolt 3 through that USB-C port. They claim they didn't do this because of security issues with Thunderbolt 3, but with so many devices out there that actually have Thunderbolt 3, it's really questionable whether security was the real issue and Microsoft didn't do it, or whether they just wanted to sell us the Surface dock. Now you can charge the Surface Go 2 through either the USB-C port or the Surface connector. The Surface power supply with the Surface connector that does come in the box will charge it faster, however. So now I want to move on to what I think is quite an important feature of this device, and that's that it's running the full Windows 10 operating system. One of the main problems with the iPad Pro was that although it had the power to do a lot of tasks, it didn't have the software. You couldn't really get the applications that could fully harness the power of the iPad. That was one of the most frustrating things because it is an incredibly powerful device, but it's up to the developers to make applications that can actually use it. Now, while the Surface Go 2 is running the full Windows 10 operating systems, meaning that you can get all the apps you could want, it just doesn't have the power to run the most demanding applications. It will struggle to run applications such as Photoshop and definitely won't get very far with any kind of video editing software. That said, surfing the web and writing Word documents and all those kinds of things will run incredibly smoothly, so that's what this device is really for. So now let's talk about some of the exclusive features that you get with the Surface Go 2. Now you are getting a 8 megapixel rear facing camera and a 5 megapixel front facing camera. The rear facing camera might be useful for scanning documents or anything like that. It's not going to be an incredibly impressive camera, but it will definitely get the job done. The thing about the front-facing camera is that it just looks so much better than pretty much any laptop out there. All the Surface devices seem to have this. For some reason, other laptop manufacturers are just terrible at putting good cameras in their laptops, so the Surface Go 2 has nailed it here. The image quality will look so much better when you're on a Skype call or anything like that. You are also getting Windows Hello facial recognition, which is incredibly useful and convenient. You're not getting a fingerprint reader, which I kind of prefer on laptops, but I guess Windows Hello is just as good. As it is a Surface product, you're also going to be able to use all these Surface pens and Surface dials and anything like that, which is incredibly useful for note-taking or drawing. The experience probably isn't as good as you get on Apple's iPads, but it's probably the next best thing. You can also use the Surface Go keyboard from the last generation on this generation, which I think is really nice to see. Apple always seems to change the keyboard slightly when they move on to the next generation, so you can't use the last generation keyboard, which is terrible really, but Microsoft have allowed you to use the last generation keyboard, which is really good. One last thing to mention is that although on, I think, many other Surface devices, you do get pretty good speakers, on the Surface Go 2, the front-firing speakers out of the sides of the display seem to be incredibly quiet. I don't know why that is, but it's definitely not to the standard of Apple's iPads, and it's something they should definitely improve on in the next generation. The next thing to talk about is price. So the base model starts at £399. That's just the device itself. You're not getting any of the accessories like the keyboard, so you're going to have to pay around £100 extra to get the keyboard. But the base model will get you the Intel Pentium Gold processor, 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of storage. I would strongly recommend avoiding this model specifically unless you absolutely have to, because I think it wouldn't be as smooth as you would like and it would just be a little bit slow. The price does go all the way up to £719, and for that you're getting an Intel Core M3 processor, 8 gigs of RAM, 1 to 8 gigs of storage and LTE. Now that is still less expensive than the base model of the iPad Pro. However, it is still pretty expensive for what you're getting. You're definitely paying a premium here. I would suggest going somewhere in the middle of the base model and the top spec model to get the best value for money. Overall, the Surface Go 2 is a nice update to the last generation, and it's definitely a nice little device. I think a lot of people could make some really good use out of it. Obviously, it's not going to be able to handle really demanding tasks, as I said, but for note-taking and other things, I think it could be really useful. That's it from this video. If you liked it, please press the thumbs up button. If you loved it, please consider subscribing. Thanks.